Joining us right now, though, from Meaning of Catholic is Timothy Flanders, also the editor at 1 Peter 5. Good morning to you, Timothy.
Good morning. Jesus is King. How y'all doing?
Praise be to God. We are alive, and that counts. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Too blessed to be stressed.
You've been hanging around Jesse Romero again, I can tell. There was a story that came out, I think it was end of last week, early this week. Archbishop ELPIDOPHOROS, I apologize for obliterating his name, but he is apparently the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, and very recently he went and baptized a child of an openly gay couple whom the child was not conceived but brought to term through a surrogate. And it is a very scandalous story. And so the question becomes, is the East now going along with this sort of a woke ideology that many in the West are? And we thought we'd get your comments on that this morning, Timothy Flanders.
Certainly, yeah. The Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox communions, and now there's actually a formal schism within the Eastern Orthodox between Moscow and Constantinople. And this is on the Constantinople side of that schism. So there's actually 3 schisms, or 4. You can count it 4 schisms in the East. There's many different schisms in the East. That's why at 1 Peter 5 we call it Greek schisms, plural. It's very difficult to understand because there's a lot of different things going on. For Catholics, an easy way to break this down is to say that there are many popes in the Eastern Orthodox world. There are many popes. Here's what I mean by that. For Catholics, we take for granted that certain issues which bear upon the universal church, for example, gay marriage, baptizing a surrogate mother, or even surrogacy itself, or even, I'll back it up even further, contraception. We take for granted that contraception has been definitively decided by the universal magisterium of the church. It's been closed. The matter is closed. In the East, every single spiritual father, meaning every priest of a church, actually can make his own decision on something like contraception. So you go to one Eastern priest and he may say one thing, you go to another and he may say another. So for many things that we take for granted, there are actually different popes in the East who make their own decisions. This particular instance is a representation of that. There are various issues among the Eastern churches that they have not resolved, that we have resolved because we have a universal magisterium. They do not. And so it's left to the individual bishop or the individual priest to decide on these controversial topics. This particular bishop has decided on this particular topic, which has caused controversy to other Orthodox bishops in other Orthodox churches or communions who rightly condemn this act, but they have no ecclesiastical structure to resolve this as we do as Catholics. And so all they can do is basically protest it and say this is wrong, but they can't have an ecumenical council to resolve this universally. They can break communion with him, but they can't really excommunicate him in a universal sense. So those are some of the factors that we need to keep in mind when we consider this as Catholics.
And I believe he performed this baptism in Greece, if I'm not mistaken. He traveled over there, even though he's from the United States, to perform this, and it was like it was it looks like in some ways it looks like a contrived hit job, like it was intentional to have this sort of splash and this effort. And many in the Roman Church, we'll call it the Roman Church, and many in the Church in the West have been looking east as sort of an escape hatch, a lifeboat, if you will, in the midst of grave scandal. The synodal path that has caused so much scandal in the headlines, especially coming out of Germany, the Summer of Shame in 2018 with McCarrick, the ongoing financial sex abuse scandals over and over again. So many in the West have been going east, thinking that is their way of separating but still staying in the church. What would you say to that, Timothy Flanders?
It's basically a surface level solution. So this is the most famous person who did this, obviously, is Rod Dreyer, who lost his faith during the original sex abuse scandal in the early 2000s and he became Eastern Orthodox. And he said that he lost his faith because he was confronted by so much evil, basically. And certainly we can sympathize with that. Many Catholics, our brethren, are struggling with that. But what you receive when you're Eastern Orthodox, and I'm saying this because I worshiped as in the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox churches for 4 years before I came to Rome, is that if you stay in your own parish as an Eastern Orthodox and you don't read about any other Eastern Orthodox parishes, you don't travel, you just stay in your own church, and like I said, you kind of have your own pope as your own priest, and you don't look anywhere else beneath the surface in Eastern Orthodoxy, that will definitely convince you, because you won't actually see these deeper issues. You won't go to a different Eastern Orthodox priest, and get a different story about what is Eastern Orthodox doctrine or morals. Essentially, you can definitely, it's basically a different method of sticking your head in the sand, because on the surface, you can have this beautiful liturgy, you can have what seems to be solid doctrine, but as soon as you scratch beneath the surface and you start to go deeper into the reality of the Orthodox churches, it does not become a solution to the problem. Because there is actually a sex abuse crisis in the Eastern Orthodox world, similar to things that are going on in the West. You're not going to escape that same issue in the East. And there's also doctrinal confusion in the East. But what is worse is that there's not only doctrinal confusion, but there's no way to actually resolve that doctrinal confusion. In the Catholic Church, we do have doctrinal confusion, obviously. We have got bad priests, bad bishops, but we have a universal magisterium. We have various universal catechisms which can check what is being said by a bishop. And we have more recent issues like contraception or various things like that have been definitively resolved. Now, whereas in the if you go to the Eastern Orthodox Church, they haven't had an ecumenical council since 787. Some dispute as to which one it was, but 787 is the most agreed number. So they haven't dealt with all these different issues that have come 1,000 years later. There's no universal agreement on all these different other issues. So ultimately, you yourself become the ultimate authority to decide for yourself with your own spiritual father what you think is Eastern Orthodoxy. So you're kind of left with the same sort of Protestant world in the sense that you can be the ultimate authority. You can be your own pope in some ways. So you don't escape that.
And you know what's interesting, and I wanted to get your take on this, Timothy. Welcome back to the show. In America, there is an effort to combine all Eastern churches under one umbrella. And so I know that like there are several, I can't remember the name of it though. The name is escaping me, but there's like a sort of like a general default Orthodox type of a name that all Ruthenians and Greeks and all these people kind of come under one umbrella. It seems to me that the East is unrecoverable because it's gotten so caught up in nationalism that it really probably can't come into what we have and enjoy in the West with a hierarchy, a magisterium, an authority. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I was a grad student with the Catholic University of Ukraine studying ecumenism for years before I actually became Catholic, and I was studying this issue. How can we reconcile the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox churches? How can we come back together and heal this schism? And ultimately, I realized that in my view, I don't think that the biggest thing that's really preventing this is Eastern Orthodox disunity with themselves.
Yeah.
And so the Roman Catholic Church can have a universal, they can draw up a doctrinal decree, and they can say, we all agree to this doctrinal decree. Do you sign on to it or not? And that would be like the terms for unity. But what actually happened in the official dialogue between the East and the West was that the schism between Russia and Moscow got so bad that Russia is the most dominant in terms of people. There's more Russian Orthodox than there are every other Orthodox combined. They left the dialogue because of a dispute between Russia and Constantinople. So they can't, and not only that, I mean, we can go to very, very basic issues. For example, baptism. Who's baptized? Is a Catholic baptized or not? There's a disagreement between Russians and Greeks over this, and they haven't been able to resolve this for hundreds of years. And so we really can't resolve our issues on a corporate level and just have all the Eastern Orthodox be reconciled to the West, because they can't reconcile with each other. And the reason they can't reconcile with each other is because they have no universal magisterium as it was in the first 1,000 years of the church history.
You know, Mr. Flanders, I was speaking with a friend of mine recently who me and him were serving the traditional mass together. We learned to serve the traditional mass together. He went off to Franciscan University, and due to, a lot of the responses to Pope Francis and the things that Pope Francis says and does, he was convinced that the papacy is false because of this, because he was like, okay, well, clearly Pope Francis is a heretic, and clearly everyone is just gaslighting me and telling me that he's not. And so I guess two questions. One, why is it important that we actually address the issues and not try to cover up the scandalous things that are happening in the church? And two, how would you respond to someone who is trying to have a theological argument against the magisterium of the Roman Church in favor of the Eastern?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, the Roman Catholic Church is the true Church of Christ. So we don't need to cover anything up. We can just pull out all the gory details of anything, really. We don't need to be afraid of the truth, because we are the true church. So we can have the most intense criticism of everything. The problem is that, here's the problem, is that Eastern Orthodox themselves cannot admit that there is no Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology as such. There are very few Eastern Orthodox writers who are willing to even admit this. And so if you go off on the internet, or if you're reading an Eastern Orthodox book, they'll say things like, the Eastern Orthodox Church teaches X, Y, Z, but there's actually no way to prove that that's the case. So, for example, somebody would say, Orthodox Church rejects the Immaculate Conception. Well, that's actually disputed among the Orthodox. That's the reality. But Eastern Orthodox writers themselves will deceive their own selves as to what their church even is. And the reality is that there is no Orthodox Church, period, as such. There's the Russian Orthodox Church, there's the Greek Orthodox Church, there's the Coptic Church, and these are individual churches which have individual doctrines about the sacraments, about ecclesiology. They can't agree as to who can call an ecumenical council, what constitutes an ecumenical council. They can't agree with each other. So there is no Orthodox Church singular. There's merely Orthodox churches, and they're all going to disagree as to all these different topics. And so that's the first thing. So we can't even compare the two. We're basically just comparing Roman Catholic ecclesiology with various Eastern Orthodox opinions that exist in the East. So that's the first issue. The second issue is, yes, we currently have a crisis in the Western Catholic Church, obviously, but the crisis is actually resolved in potency. Here's what I mean by that. The Roman Catholic Church has the power to resolve this crisis. We would just need a new oath against modernism or a new decree or something. The Pope can actually do that because we know he's done it before. We know he has the power to do it. We wish that he would do it, but he's not doing it. So, but the problem is that we actually have the power to resolve this crisis. It exists in the Catholic Church. We know that. It's just not happening. Whereas in the East, you go to the East, there's no actual power to resolve their issues. These issues have been going on for 500 years, 1,000 years. Moscow and Constantinople, they've been butting heads for 500 years. They haven't been able to resolve their issues. They can't resolve their issues. There's no potency there to even resolve anything. So therefore, we can have confidence and hope that the issues in the West will be resolved because we know that they have the power to resolve, but we have no confidence that the issues in the East will be resolved. So you can go to the East, but you're not going to find that true confidence in the true church.
Well, much like the federal government, once they take a power, they don't ever want to give it back. Do you see these national churches wanting to submit to Rome, to Pope Francis, or any other pope after him?
Not really en masse. Typically, usually that has happened. We do have all of the Eastern Catholic churches, which mirror all of the Eastern churches. We have every single Eastern communion represented that's in communion with Rome, but typically this has a lot of these unions have happened when there was a political situation where people kind of woke up to the fact that, wow, it would be better actually if we were with Rome. That's why we were willing to reinvestigate these issues. But if you live in a Orthodox country, or you live in sort of this Orthodox bubble, and everything's fine, you're not going to question that unless a crisis happens. So when things get worse and worse and worse, people are willing to talk more unity, unless they just have an immense measure of goodwill. So I certainly advocate a return to the old ways of so-called uniotism. I think that's the best way forward. Even though I do think that the international dialogue has done some good between the East and West.
I find it fascinating because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Eastern churches still do look to the Patriarch in Constantinople, or what we would say Istanbul today. Do they not give him some sort of figurehead-like respect?
Yes, but that's disputed as well. So the main Russia came out with its own Russian ideology, and this was back in like 1555. They came out with a Russian ideology where they were the third Rome, and so they have a primacy, whereas Constantinople has always maintained they have the primacy now that they say we have fallen into heresy. So that's been a disputed point. But yes, there is, in theory, among some Orthodox, the Greeks in particular, or those that follow Greece, or those that were under the Mohammedans during the Ottoman rule, they would, yes, look to Constantinople, but the Russians are more numerous.
Why would that Patriarch not leave Istanbul? I mean, golly gee whiz, there's, besides his chancery, how many of the flock are still there that he's ministering to? Wouldn't he rather relocate to Greece or some other place? Even America, there's probably more Orthodox in America than there are in all of Turkey. Why wouldn't he do that?
I would say it's probably because it's still a sacred place. It's still there's part of that is based on an ideology of the old imperial primacy, that the reason that see was elevated, and this was a dispute in the first millennium, the reason that see was elevated was because it was the imperial capital. And so it's something that's tied as a sacred city to this primacy. And so leaving it may give the appearance of forsaking that primacy because it's tied to that city.
We have just about a minute and a half left with Timothy Flanders. So let me just go back to the woke ideology. This archbishop seems to have a propensity for that. But on the whole, how many in the East have these liberal, progressive tendencies?
Well, it depends on which issue you're talking about. Like in terms of contraception, I would say that's widespread. Many different Orthodox will disagree on whether contraception is wrong. If you talk about divorce and remarriage, when there's a legitimate, valid marriage, that's completely universal. The Orthodox Church will remarry someone who is actually married to someone else in an adulterous marriage.
Wow.
That's complicated. But in terms of the woke stuff, it is a lot more hush-hush. It's happening, but it's a lot more hush-hush. So this is why this is a lot bigger. I am told that there are numerous bishops in the United States who do sort of gay stuff under cover of darkness or whatever, in terms of gay marriages or gay baptisms or whatever. But generally it's a lot fewer. It's similar in some senses because we do have Catholic bishops in the United States who are doing things indirectly, but it is a similar number, I think. But there is more of a shame or hush-hush to their credit among Eastern Orthodox.
Wow. Well, we're just about out of time with Timothy Flanders, 1 Peter 5, 1peter5.com. Check him out. A lot of great articles over there. Timothy, thank you for your time today. God bless you. God love you. Have a great day, sir. All right, that's going to do it for hour number 1 of Catholic Drive Time. So grateful for Timothy being on the program. In the second hour, if you can join us, David O'Gray is going to be our guest. What did the Pope just say? Did the Pope just give a pass to Catholic Joe Biden on abortion? We're going to have that conversation. I have a theory as to why he's done that. I'll share that with you in the next hour if you can join us. You can always hang out with us on our live stream at grnonline.com youtube.com/CDT. Otherwise, see you tomorrow.